This is A Million Other Choices, and I am your host. I have my ugly Christmas sweater on today, but this is not a festive story. This is the murder of Mark Mariani of Calgary. Now, Calgary is my hometown, and Mark Mariani was one of the few residents that was actually born here. He was born at the Old General Hospital on April 26, 1963, to his mom Arlene and dad Robert. He has a big sister named Catherine and a brother named Robert Jr. So after Mark was born, he had a little brother named Dino, and Dino was mentioned actually in the story of Selma and Julie Tran, which was on my podcast. He reached out to Julie's brother actually after her death to sort of lend a supportive shoulder to him. It's funny about Dino because I had reached out to him while I was sort of working on this story originally, which was in February of 2023 that I originally did this for the podcast, and I had reached out to him just to talk to him, and he is very supportive of doing the podcast to get like his brother Mark's name out there and his story told. Um, but anyways, we kind of left it there. But his name is still comes up under my Facebook messages, which is under my personal page rather than under the podcast one that I sent him the emails through, or Facebook messages or whatever. And then it was several months later, one of my girlfriends was getting um she wasn't getting a boob job. She was having corrective surgery or whatever, but I referred to it as boob job, and I wanted to text her to see how she was doing after the surgery, and so I texted like, "Hey, how's the boob job?" And I accidentally texted it to Dino. But he was very good about it. It was very embarrassing, but he was really good about it. But anyways, that's just a little story about Mark's brother Dino, who's a really nice guy. Like he's just really, really super nice guy. Very supportive of other victims of homicides. And his brother Mark's story is just really, really tragic, and it's just a terrible story. So, Robert and Arlene were immigrants originally from Italy, and they owned a restaurant, and the kids grew up bussing tables there. They'd wash dishes and just generally learning the world of cooking and restaurants. And Mark really loved it. He was 6'2" as a teenager. He had like a husky build. But then in his early 20s, he started to lose weight, like a lot of weight quite quickly. And some of it was intentional. He was trying to tone up his figure, but not all of it was. And he also started to not really feel well. So when he was 22, he was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Crohn's is an autoimmune disease that kind of kicks the immune system into overdrive and starts to attack the digestive tract, and can affect anywhere from the lips all the way down to the very bottom of the digestive tract. I also have Crohn's, so I can speak with some knowledge about it. However, its effects, its symptoms, the severity, and the treatment plan, they're different for each person. So while, for example, Mark struggled to keep weight on, I struggle to keep it off. So unfortunately for us, there is no cure for Crohn's. It can only be managed, but only until recently. There wasn't a lot of great treatment options for it. So one thing that I should mention here is that Crohn's and colitis are quite a bit different than, say, IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, um, where having IBS can be quite an irritant to your life, and can impact what you can and cannot enjoy eating. Crohn's and colitis are diseases of the bowel. There's actual damage to the bowel, usually in the intestines. There can also be issues with your joints, your eyes, your skin. It's systemic, right? So it affects everything. And for most of us, there are, of course, disruptions to normal everyday living, and of course, lots of doctor's appointments. So, because Mark's Crohn's was quite bad, he was quite severe, they tried a number of different surgeries. taking out some large sections of his small intestine. But eventually, the doctors decided that it was time for a colostomy bag, which is otherwise known as the dreaded poop bag. Colostomy bags have come a long way from when Mark had one, but they are still sort of the dread of all of us with Crohn's because they're life changing. And they do put a lot of end to the pain that comes with Crohn's, but they are pretty disruptive. And before they made these advancements to them, they leaked, they shifted, they were cumbersome. Now, I personally, I don't have one. If you were wondering, but the possibility does always loom there for me. So I feel what Mark was living with. So unfortunately, his Crohn's put an end to his fully independent life outside of his parents' home, which was in Scenic Acres. So he had to move home. On October 1st of 2010, at one of his usual many doctor's appointments, he was finally told some really good news that there had been some advancements in the treatments of Crohn's, specifically with what are called biologic drugs. Now, biologics themselves are not actually that new. Insulin is technically a biologic, but they've been using biologics to treat organ transplant patients since the 1980s and discovered that when you suppress the immune system, which is essential to prevent transplant rejection. The same technology seems to help kick diseases like Crohn's, colitis, rheumatoid arthritis into remission. So this doctor told him that with the use of these biologics, there was a good chance that they would be able to reverse the colostomy bag, and there was hope that he could start to gain some weight and some strength back, and finally get have a less disruptive life. So this was a huge deal for Mark, who had been battling like half his life at this point with some normalcy. So the next night, he went out to celebrate with some of his friends and do what he loved to do, which was line dancing at his favorite Western bar, which is probably something you have to live in Alberta to appreciate doing for fun. Now, I'm not sure what country bar it was that they went to, but it was likely one along 16th Avenue in the Northwest as a strip of about 15, it's about a 15-minute drive from his parents' home in Scenic Acres, um, which is a well-established neighborhood where the houses were built in the 1980s. So it was once considered the suburbs. It's now considered part of the sort of larger inner city areas that surround our downtown core, which is not important. You probably don't care about that. Anyways, Mark was not a partier. He didn't do the one night stand thing. Home was kind of his safe place. And like most of us with bathroom issues, home is good, outside not so good. So when he didn't come home that night, his parents, particularly his mom, was worried immediately that something had maybe happened. Denise called Catherine, Robert and Dino, all of them, to ask them if they'd seen or heard from him. Like maybe he decided to stay at their place, one of their places, but nobody had heard from him. Meanwhile, at a small strip mall that was across from North Hill Mall, so 1544 16th Avenue Northwest to be exact, there's currently a Dave's liquor store there. There's an adult source video store and a budget car rental. So 911 got a call at 8:56 a.m. of a battered body that was laying in the parking lot and appeared to be deceased. One of our favorite homicide detectives here in Calgary, Dave Sweet, was called in to be the primary and to investigate. If you go back into some of my other videos, you will see that I did an interview with Detective Dave Sweet. I think the video is called Talking to a Homicide Detective. I'll try and link it in the show notes. If I remember, I always forget. The body of the man, which was initially thought was maybe like a stabbing victim because there was so much blood like that was pooled on him and around him. But to Detective Sweet, he could tell that this was actually a beating, like a really bad and very vicious beating. The man was completely unrecognizable, and he was found laying next to a Chevy Blazer SUV, which Dave suspected was his vehicle. He appeared to be trying to get into his vehicle when he succumbed to his many injuries and died on the ground just outside of the vehicle. The man's pants were kind of down in an awkward fashion, like he had been trying to hike them back up after having them down. There was also a trail of blood that was leading from the back alley. And the alleys in that area of town are like they're a little bit shady. So, robbery, well, maybe patronizing a sex worker was kind of a likely scenario to look into. There was an alley, or in the alley, there was the wallet that looked tossed, a set of keys, and a cell phone. And of course, they all belonged to 47-year-old Mark Mariani. But unfortunately, a positive identification by family was going to have to be necessary to ensure that they had the right victim, which is an unbelievably haunting. It's a tough job for any family, especially one that's as close knit as the Marianis were. So when Mark's sister Kathy opened the door at her parents' place later that morning, they weren't actually surprised that something terrible had happened to Mark, but they were more surprised at what had happened to him. Like, Mark didn't have an enemy in the world, he was not into shady stuff at all. So the Marianis were all brought in for questioning, all paint a picture of Mark as someone who would not have been patronizing a sex worker. But he was quite frail in stature, which would make him vulnerable for like the target of a robbery. Um, Now, they also mention, of course, the Crohn's disease that he had, which, of course, explains for Detective Sweet the origins of this colostomy bag that they found on him. So he tracks down surveillance footage of Mark visiting the video store the night of the murder, and they kind of work on the theory that he likely stopped in the back alley for like a pit stop before heading home. Now, a lot has been made about why he went into this back alley. I think that is my opinion that he might have just had to go pee and then he went there to do that. It's not unheard of. I mean, guys do that all the time. But there are a lot of reports that make it sound like he was sick and that he went in there to have like a bowel movement in the alley. Like, I highly doubt it. I mean, the bags are disruptive, but they completely bypass, the colon, so you don't have to go to the bathroom anymore, if that makes sense. Like, you don't go to the washroom normally anymore. Um, so I don't think that he was doing anything that would have been seen as unusual or distasteful that would garner him any unwanted attention by being back there. I think he just went back there to have a pee. So anyways, Detective Sweet determines that the alley is obviously where they're gonna find any kind of physical evidence, if there is any. Now he appeared to have been stomped to death. Like, if you can imagine the horror of that. Like, there were actually boot prints found on his body, and they found boot prints where they think that the beating had started in the back alley. But what's odd is that the wallet that he had still contained cash and all his bank cards. So robbery wasn't the motive. So, like, what could be the motive? Now, they did find a partially ripped up note with the name Adriana Snowden, and then there was a number that was inside of his wallet. So they start there. Like, perhaps he was lured to the back alley under the guise of meeting someone for some reason. And he tracked Adriana Snowden down to the bar that Mark had been at that night. She was the bartender there and had given Mark her number because she was trying to start a clientele for this financial advising business that she was going to be starting up. And she said that Mark had been there that night with a balding man that gave her the creeps. So they left shortly before closing time around 1:30 a.m. The guy's name was traced to cell phone messages that were in Mark's phone. His name was Bart Davids. Now, Davids turned out to be Mark's business partner of sorts. They were working on this freelance, basically writing legal letters for those that had maybe gotten themselves in some kind of tax troubles, and he was helping them out. It was a perfectly legal, but maybe an unconventional way of making a little bit of extra money. But Bart was Mark's friend, and he didn't have anything to do with killing him. So they were able to get a timeline by looking at surveillance footage that matched up with both Adriana and Bart's telling of the events. That Mark had stopped at an ATM, he got some cash out, and then went to Tim Hortons where he met with Bart and paid him some commissions on their work that they had been doing. And then the two of them went to the bar, had some drinks, and left parting ways at around 1:30 a.m. And then shortly later, Mark is seen leaving the adult source video store, where he was later, of course, found beaten to death the next morning in the parking lot. So the timestamp on the footage was 2:03 a.m. Now, unfortunately, there were no cameras that captured the back alley where the beating took place, but what they did notice on the surveillance footage from the video store was that the clerk of the store came towards the door, peered out shortly after Mark had left, like he was kind of concerned about something that was happening outside. And when questioned about that, the video clerk said that he heard a lot of noise coming from outside in the parking lot, the back alley, and on the roof. Now, being that it wasn't the best of neighborhoods, and the back alley was really dark and rather looming, and it being late at night, he didn't venture out any further to look into anything. So Detective Sweet decided to go check out the roof, and he found a discarded can of red spray paint. Now, this area is pretty full of graffiti, so it wasn't really taken at that time as more than just sort of ambience, really. But when he found the can, he decides that maybe going back and taking a closer look at some of the graffiti in the area, see if he can match up any of this red paint to it. It might help track down someone that was at least in the area that night. And he sees that there's this red swastika painted on one of the walls, which was nearest to the video store, and it appears pretty fresh. And the red does appear to match the red of this spray paint can. Now, the autopsy on Mark discovered 55 boot impressions on his body. 55. He had fractured ribs, multiple points of impact. The boot prints appeared to have been inflicted by steel-toed boots. They also discovered red paint on his shirt, as if he had rubbed against some wet paint during this beating. So they decide to do this experiment and literally watch paint dry. And it turns out that the swastika had to have been tagged or painted right around the time that Mark entered that back alley. Now, fortunately, there aren't a lot of white supremacists or neo Nazis living in Calgary. I mean, regular racists we have, but organized hate groups are generally more underground. So what they discover that in one of the houses that's near the crime scene is a couple of local dirtbags that are connected with a hate group known as the Western European Bloodline. There's 26-year-old Robert Rietmeyer, his wife Zoe, who's an Eastern European migrant who just up and left her mom and her 2-year-old child behind without a word to hook up with this Rietmeyer character, and 24-year-old Tyler 24-year-old Tyler Stirrup. Now, Rietmeyer was a suspect already in an attempted murder, the curb stomping of a First Nations man in downtown, where both Rietmeyer and Stirrup were on parole at the time for a variety of dirtbag activities. Now, both idiots were quite active on their social media at the time, and Rietmeyer listed his hobbies as curb stomping, spreading hate, and a number of other Nazi crap. Now, Detective Dave Sweet opened up his personal Facebook page, probably not his actual personal Facebook page, and hit request friend. And wouldn't you know, it was just that easy to befriend a neo-Nazi. So Rietmeyer and Tyler, in addition to sharing this dilapidated house together, also shared the same probation officer. So Dave went to see him, see what these guys are up to lately, and he tells Dave that Rietmeyer always came in dressed in the full ridiculous neo-Nazi getup. Military gear, big Doc Marten curb stomping Nazi boots, until the week before, when he suddenly came in looking even more ridiculous in his full gear. But now he's donning a pair of red, like skater shoes, or sneakers, as Americans call it. I think trainers are what they're called in the UK. Anyways, he's looking suspicious. So they get a warrant to search his hole of skank that he calls his home and plant a few surveillance bugs while they're there. Just kind of to keep an eye on him. They get a first eye view of the fact that Rietmeyer liked to beat his wife. Luckily, he never caught on that each time that it happened, there was suddenly a noise complaint, and uniformed officers were there in like record time to diffuse the situation. Zoe was also pregnant, they learned. So parenting classes were a little bit lost on Rietmeyer. Now, Tyler wasn't much better. They were really two like thugs, tight as thugs can get. So they planted an undercover cop to befriend these two buffoons, to keep pressure on them that the police were getting close to find the people responsible for killing Mark Mariani. And 10 months later, after they had murdered Mark in that back alley for doing nothing more than basically taking a break to pee, Tyler confessed to this undercover officer. And of course, it was all captured on undercover video cameras. So, naturally, Detective Sweet, he's quite happy to arrest both of them. And when confronted with the evidence against him in this police interview room, Robert Rietmeyer, who's a local tough guy and member of the so called master race, threw up. And in March 2013, Tyler pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and at his sentencing, he offered a half-hearted apology to the family, saying that he wished he could bring Mark back for them. Mark's brother Dino said of Mark, "Even the last day that I talked to him, he was in pain and stuff, but we all he wanted to do was go and help people, and that's the kind of guy Mark was. He really was. He was a generous, giving man." And his sister Kathy told reporters that her parents have both aged about 20 years since Mark's murder. Now Stirrup was given a 10-year parole ineligibility period, and he became eligible for parole in 2021. He is still serving his sentence as far as I know today. In November of 2013, like a nasty rat, Rietmeyer pleaded not guilty, forcing the family through the brutality of a trial with pictures and testimony about Mark's last hours, and was subsequently found guilty by a jury. So he was given a life sentence with parole ineligibility of 13 years. He did not acknowledge the family at all at the hearing. And Dino said, "For Rietmeyer to say nothing says a lot. It says more than if he had said something." He is also still serving his sentence. He did try to get his parole ineligibility period reduced, but he was unsuccessful with that. So hopefully for the Marianis and really everybody in our community, these two animals will remain caged up until they take their last breaths. Normally, I would encourage forgiveness because I know that that has helped me move forward, but I don't think that I can encourage that in Mark's case. Like, what's there to forgive? Like, these guys have no remorse. Like, how do you even start to forgive something that they don't even realize was wrong, that they're just likely going to go out and do again if given half a chance? Both Tyler and Robert are still actively on social media, believe it or not. They do not have appear to have changed their hateful ways at all. I would not encourage any of you to friend request them. And that was the brutal, hateful murder of Mark Mariani. And I am going to be back again with another case. I hope that in the meantime you do your rate review thing, subscribe, put some comments down below, hopefully nice ones, whatever, put whatever comments you want. And as always, thank you so much for watching.